Sarah Martinez grabbed her coffee mug and looked out the kitchen window at the gray October morning. The leaves were turning golden brown, and a light mist hung over the quiet suburban street. Her golden retriever Max was already at the door with his leash in his mouth, tail wagging with excitement. Sarah had been taking Max on the same route through Oakwood Park every morning for 3 years. Ever since she moved to this peaceful neighborhood after her divorce, she put on her red jacket and sneakers, clipped Max's leash to his collar, and stepped outside. The cool air felt refreshing against her face. Sarah worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, and these morning walks were the highlight of her day. They helped clear her mind before sitting at the computer for hours. Max pulled slightly ahead as they walked down Maple Street toward the park entrance. Sarah noticed Mrs. Johnson tending to her garden next door and waved. The elderly woman smiled back and called out her usual greeting about the beautiful morning. Everything seemed perfectly normal and routine as they entered the park. Sarah let Max lead the way along the familiar path that wound around the small pond. The park was mostly empty, except for an occasional jogger or another dog walker. She loved this peaceful time before the world fully woke up. The only sounds were birds chirping in the oak trees and Max's happy panting as he trotted along beside her. They had been walking for about 15 minutes when Max suddenly stopped near a bench by the pond. His ears perked up, and he looked toward a cluster of trees about 50 yards away. Sarah followed his gaze, but didn't see anything unusual. She tugged gently on the leash, but Max refused to move. He kept looking in the same direction. His body tense and alert, Sarah squinted through the morning mist, trying to see what had caught Max's attention. At first, she thought it might be a squirrel or another dog, but then she noticed a small figure partially hidden behind one of the larger oak trees. It looked like a child, but something seemed strange about the way the figure was positioned. The child appeared to be crouched down, almost as if trying to hide. Max whined softly and took a few steps toward the trees, pulling Sarah along. She had never seen her dog act this way before. He was usually calm and obedient during their walks. His unusual behavior made Sarah feel uneasy. She decided to investigate what was causing Max to act so strangely. As they got closer, Sarah could see more clearly that it was indeed a young boy, probably around 8 or 9 years old. He was wearing a dirty blue hoodie and jeans that were too big for his small frame. The child was sitting on the ground with his back against the tree, and he appeared to be alone. Sarah's maternal instincts kicked in immediately. What was a child doing alone in the park so early in the morning? She approached slowly, not wanting to frighten the boy. When she was about 20 feet away, she could see his face more clearly. He looked up at her with wide, frightened eyes. His dark hair was messy and there were streaks of dirt on his cheeks. But what struck Sarah most was the expression on his face. It wasn't just fear, it was desperation. The boy's eyes seemed to be pleading with her, but he didn't say a word. Max sat down beside Sarah, but he continued to watch the boy intently. The dog seemed to sense that something was wrong. Sarah took another step closer and spoke gently, trying not to startle the child. She asked if he was okay and if he needed help. The boy looked directly at her and she could see tears forming in his eyes. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he made a small gesture with his hand, pointing toward his throat. Sarah's heart sank as she realized the boy might not be able to speak. She knelt down to his level and asked if he was hurt. The child shook his head but continued to look at her with those pleading eyes. He seemed desperate to communicate something important, but he couldn't find a way to express it. Sarah noticed that his clothes looked like he had been outside all night. The morning dew had made them damp. He was shivering slightly in the cool air. The boy suddenly reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. His hands were shaking as he held it out to Sarah. She took the paper and carefully unfolded it. Written in shaky handwriting were the words "Help me" in large letters. Below that, in smaller writing, it said, "Can't go home. Bad man there. Scared." Sarah's blood ran cold as she read the desperate message. She looked back at the boy, who was watching her face anxiously. When he saw that she had read the note, relief seemed to wash over his features. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. This child was clearly in danger, and he had been trying to get help the only way he knew how. She realized that Max had somehow sensed the boy's distress, which was why her dog had insisted on investigating. Sarah knew she had to act quickly. She couldn't leave this frightened child alone, but she also wasn't sure what the best course of action would be. She looked around the park to see if anyone else was nearby who might be looking for the boy, but they were still alone. The morning mist seemed to make everything feel more urgent and isolated. Sarah made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Sarah's hands trembled as she folded the note carefully and put it in her jacket pocket. She looked at the boy again, trying to stay calm despite the fear growing in her chest. The child was still shivering, and she could see goosebumps on his arms where his sleeves had rolled up. She needed to gain his trust and find out more about his situation without frightening him further. She sat down on the ground next to him, ignoring the dampness seeping through her jeans. Max lay down beside them, as if he understood the gravity of the situation. Sarah spoke in the softest voice she could manage, telling the boy that she wanted to help him and that he was safe with her. She asked if he had been outside all night, and the boy nodded slowly, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks. Sarah's heart ached for this frightened child. She gently asked if he was hungry, and his eyes lit up with desperate hope. She realized he probably hadn't eaten in hours, maybe even days. She had a granola bar in her jacket pocket from yesterday's walk, and she offered it to him. The boy took it with eager hands and ate it quickly, as if he was afraid someone might take it away. While he ate, Sarah tried to think of the best way to communicate with him. She pulled out her phone and opened the Notes app, then handed it to him. She explained that he could type anything he wanted to tell her. The boy looked at the phone uncertainly at first, but then began typing with one finger, concentrating hard on each letter. The message he typed made Sarah's blood run cold. Man came to house 3 days ago. Mom went away. He said she not coming back. He mean to me. Locks me in a room. I got out window last night. Been hiding here. Sarah stared at the words, trying to process what she was reading. This child had been essentially kidnapped and was now homeless and terrified. She typed a response asking for his name. The boy typed back Danny. Sarah introduced herself and Max, trying to create some normalcy in this terrifying situation. She asked Danny if he knew the man who was at his house, and he shook his head vigorously. He typed that the man was big and scary with a beard, and that he smelled like cigarettes and alcohol. Sarah's mind was racing with possibilities, none of them good. She wondered if Danny's mother was in danger or worse. She knew she needed to contact the police, but she was afraid that calling them right now might scare Danny into running away. She needed to keep him safe and get more information first. She asked Danny if he knew his home address, and he nodded. He typed out an address that Sarah recognized as being in the older part of town, about 2 miles from the park. She asked if he had any other family members he could stay with, like grandparents or aunts and uncles. Danny's face fell, and he typed that his grandmother lived far away and he didn't know how to reach her. Sarah made a decision. She told Danny that she was going to take him somewhere safe, where people could help him find his mother. She explained that there were good people whose job it was to help children in trouble. Danny looked scared at first, but when Sarah promised that she wouldn't leave him alone, he seemed to relax slightly. She helped Danny stand up, noticing how small and fragile he looked. He couldn't be more than 9 years old, and he was so thin that his clothes hung loose on his frame. Sarah wondered how long he had been eating properly even before this crisis happened. She took off her jacket and wrapped it around his shoulders. It was way too big for him, but it would help keep him warm as they started walking back toward the park entrance. Sarah kept talking to Danny in a gentle voice, trying to keep him calm. She told him about Max and how smart her dog was to find him. Danny reached out tentatively to pet Max, and the golden retriever seemed to understand that he needed comfort. Max walked close to Danny's side, occasionally nuzzling his hand with his nose. Sarah's mind was working frantically to plan their next steps. She decided to take Danny to her house first, where she could give him a proper meal and let him clean up while she figured out the best way to contact the authorities. She knew she was taking a risk by not calling the police immediately, but her instincts told her that Danny needed to feel safe and secure before facing more questions and uncertainty as they walked through the quiet neighborhood streets. Sarah found herself looking over her shoulder, worried that someone might be following them. Danny seemed to be doing the same thing, glancing nervously at every car that passed. His fear was contagious, and Sarah realized that they might both be in danger if the man Danny described was still looking for him. When they reached Sarah's house, she unlocked the door quickly and ushered Danny inside. The familiar warmth and safety of her home felt like a refuge. Danny stood in the entryway looking overwhelmed, as if he couldn't believe he was somewhere safe. Sarah showed him to the guest bathroom and gave him clean towels and some of her nephew's clothes that she kept for his visits. While Danny cleaned up, Sarah sat in her kitchen trying to process everything that had happened in the last hour. Her quiet morning walk had turned into a rescue mission for a child in desperate trouble. She knew that the decisions she made in the next few hours would be crucial for Danny's safety and well-being. She also couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much more dangerous than she had first realized. Sarah paced around her kitchen while waiting for Danny to finish cleaning up. She could hear the shower running upstairs, and for the first time since finding him, the boy was safe and warm. Max lay by the bathroom door, as if he was standing guard. Sarah's mind kept returning to the note Danny had written and the terrifying implications of what he had told her. She decided to call her friend Lisa, who worked as a social worker with the county's Child Protective Services. Lisa would know the proper procedures for a situation like this, and Sarah trusted her judgment. When Lisa answered, Sarah explained the situation in hushed tones. Not wanting Danny to overhear and become frightened again, Lisa's reaction was immediate concern. She told Sarah that she had done the right thing by bringing Danny somewhere safe, but that they needed to contact the police as soon as possible. She explained that if a child had been kidnapped or if his mother was missing, time was crucial for everyone's safety. Lisa said she would come over right away to help assess the situation and contact the appropriate authorities. When Danny came downstairs wearing clean clothes, he looked like a different child. His hair was clean and combed, and the dirt and fear had been washed from his face. Sarah had prepared scrambled eggs, toast, and orange juice, and Danny's eyes widened when he saw the food. He ate hungrily while Sarah sat across from him. Trying to think of the best way to explain what would happen next, she used her phone again to communicate with Danny, explaining that her friend Lisa was coming to help them. She typed that Lisa was a person whose job was to keep children safe, and that she would help them contact the police to look for his mother. Danny's face showed fear when he read about the police, but Sarah quickly reassured him that the police were there to help him, not hurt him. Danny typed a response that made Sarah's heart race. "What if Bad Man finds me? He said he would hurt me if I told anyone." Sarah realized that Danny had been threatened into silence, which explained why he hadn't tried to get help from other adults earlier. She typed back that they would make sure he was protected and that the bad man couldn't hurt him anymore. 20 minutes later, Lisa arrived with Detective Rodriguez, a specialist in child crimes. Sarah was grateful that Lisa had brought someone who was experienced with traumatized children. Detective Rodriguez was a kind-looking woman in her 40s with a gentle manner that seemed to put Danny at ease. Immediately, Lisa sat with Danny while Detective Rodriguez spoke quietly with Sarah in the living room. The detective explained that they would need to take Danny's statement and get as much information as possible about both his mother's disappearance and the man who had been holding him. She emphasized that Danny's safety was their top priority and that they had procedures in place to protect children in these situations. When they returned to the kitchen, Detective Rodriguez knelt down to Danny's level and spoke to him in a warm, reassuring voice. She explained that she was there to help find his mother and make sure he stayed safe. She asked if he would be willing to answer some questions by typing on Sarah's phone. And Danny nodded nervously. The information that Danny provided was more disturbing than Sarah had imagined. He typed that his mother, Jennifer, worked as a waitress at a diner downtown. 3 days ago, a man had come to their apartment claiming to be Jennifer's friend. Danny had hidden in his room, but he heard raised voices and what sounded like a struggle. When he came out later, his mother was gone and the man was sitting in their living room. The man had told Danny that his mother had gone away and wouldn't be coming back. He said that Danny belonged to him now, and that if he tried to leave or tell anyone, something bad would happen to his mother. The man had locked Danny in his bedroom and only let him out to use the bathroom. He had given him very little food and had threatened him constantly. "Detective?" Rodriguez's expression grew more serious with each detail Danny provided. She asked him to describe the man as completely as possible. Danny typed that he was tall and heavy, with a thick black beard and tattoos on his arms. He always wore a baseball cap and had a deep, scary voice. He drove a dark blue pickup truck that made loud noises. The detective showed Danny some photographs on her tablet, asking if he recognized any of the faces. When Danny pointed to one of the photos, Detective Rodriguez exchanged a meaningful look with Lisa. Sarah could tell that they recognized the man, and that this was not good news. Detective Rodriguez explained to Sarah that the man Danny had identified was Marcus Webb, a known criminal with a history of drug dealing and violence. He had been suspected in several missing persons cases over the past few years, but they had never been able to gather enough evidence to arrest him. Danny's testimony could be the key to finally bringing Webb to justice and finding out what happened to Jennifer and the other missing people. However, this also meant that Danny was in serious danger. Webb was known to be ruthless and would likely go to great lengths to silence the only witness who could connect him to Jennifer's disappearance. Detective Rodriguez told Sarah that they would need to place Danny in protective custody immediately while they investigated further. Danny became agitated when he heard about protective custody. Even though Detective Rodriguez explained it carefully, he grabbed Sarah's hand and typed frantically on the phone, "Don't want to go with strangers. Want to stay with Sarah and Max? They saved me." His desperate plea broke Sarah's heart, and she found herself volunteering to foster Danny temporarily, if it was possible. Detective Rodriguez and Lisa exchanged glances before explaining that while Sarah's offer was generous, she would need to go through a background check and emergency fostering process. More importantly, having Danny stay with Sarah might put them both in danger if Webb discovered where the boy was hiding, as if her words had been prophetic. Sarah's doorbell rang at that exact moment. Everyone in the kitchen froze. Detective Rodriguez immediately moved to the window and peered through the curtains. Her face went pale as she turned back to the group. In a low, urgent voice, she said, "We have a problem. There's a dark blue pickup truck parked across the street, and I can see someone watching the house." Detective Rodriguez immediately grabbed her radio and called for backup in a quiet but urgent voice. She instructed everyone to move away from the windows and stay low. Danny's face went completely white when he heard about the truck outside. He grabbed Sarah's arm tightly, his whole body shaking with fear. Sarah could feel how terrified he was, and she tried to stay calm for his sake. Lisa quickly moved to close all the curtains, while Detective Rodriguez kept watch from a position where she couldn't be seen from outside. She reported that there was definitely someone in the truck, and they appeared to be watching the house intently. The detective's worst fears were being confirmed somehow. Marcus Webb had tracked Danny to Sarah's house. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to figure out how Webb could have found them so quickly. Then she remembered that several neighbors had seen her walking with Danny earlier that morning. Mrs. Johnson had waved to them from her garden, and a few joggers had passed them on the street. In a small neighborhood like theirs, word traveled fast, and someone might have mentioned seeing Sarah with an unknown child. Detective Rodriguez made a quick decision. She told everyone that they needed to get Danny out of the house immediately, but they couldn't use the front door or Sarah's car, which was parked in the driveway. She explained that her backup officers were still several minutes away, and they couldn't wait that long. Webb might decide to approach the house at any moment, and if he was as dangerous as his record suggested, everyone inside could be in serious danger. Sarah remembered that her backyard connected to the Thompsons' property behind her, and their yard led to Oak Street, which ran parallel to her street. She suggested they could escape through the back and make their way to Oak Street, where Detective Rodriguez's car was parked around the corner. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was their best option for getting Danny to safety quickly. Detective Rodriguez agreed with the plan. She radioed her location and the escape route to the incoming backup units. She instructed Sarah to pack a quick bag with essentials for Danny, while Lisa helped the boy put on his shoes and Sarah's jacket again. Max seemed to sense the urgency. and stayed close to Danny, as if he understood that he needed to protect the child. As they prepared to leave through the back door, the doorbell rang again, followed by heavy knocking. A deep, threatening voice called out, "I know you're in there. Send the boy out, and nobody gets hurt." Danny's reaction was immediate and visceral. He collapsed to the floor, curled up in a ball, and began shaking uncontrollably. Sarah had never seen such terror in a child's eyes, detective. Rodriguez drew her weapon and positioned herself near the front door, while motioning for the others to head toward the back of the house. The knocking became more aggressive, and they could hear Webb trying the door handle. Sarah scooped Danny up in her arms, surprised by how light he was, and carried him toward the back door with Lisa and Max following close behind. Just as they reached the back door, they heard the sound of breaking glass from the front of the house. Webb had apparently decided not to wait any longer. Detective Rodriguez's voice came over her radio, reporting that the suspect had broken into the house. Sarah's hands shook as she fumbled with the back door lock, feeling precious seconds slipping away. They burst out into Sarah's backyard and ran across the lawn toward the fence that separated her property from the Thompsons. Sarah was still carrying Danny, who clung to her desperately. Lisa helped boost them over the low fence, and Max jumped over easily. Behind them, they could hear shouting and what sounded like furniture being overturned as Webb searched the house. The Thompsons' backyard was empty, and they ran across it as quietly as possible. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Danny was completely silent, but she could feel his rapid breathing against her shoulder. When they reached the fence on the far side of the Thompsons' property, they could see Oak Street through the slats. Detective Rodriguez's unmarked car was parked, exactly where she had said it would be. Lisa climbed over the fence first and ran to check that the area was clear. Sarah handed Danny over the fence to Lisa, then climbed over herself with Max. They were almost to safety when they heard shouting from the direction of Sarah's house. Webb had apparently discovered that they had escaped through the back and was now searching the neighboring yards. His angry voice echoed through the quiet neighborhood, and Sarah could hear him getting closer. Detective Rodriguez was presumably still in Sarah's house, trying to track their movements and coordinate with the backup units that were finally arriving. They reached the car just as they heard sirens approaching from multiple directions. Lisa quickly unlocked the car and helped Danny into the back seat, while Sarah and Max piled in beside him. Sarah's hands were shaking so badly she could barely buckle her seatbelt. Danny was completely silent, staring out the window with wide, frightened eyes. Lisa started the car and pulled away from the curb just as they saw a large figure appear at the fence line behind the Thompsons' house. Even from a distance, Sarah could see that it was a big man with a black beard, exactly as Danny had described. Webb spotted the car and began running toward them, but they were already pulling away. As they drove toward the police station, Sarah looked back to see multiple police cars converging on her neighborhood. She hoped Detective Rodriguez was safe, and that they would be able to arrest Webb before he could escape again. Danny had curled up against her side, and she could feel him trembling. Max lay across both their laps, providing comfort and warmth. Sarah realized that her quiet life had been completely turned upside down in the span of a few hours. Her house was now a crime scene, and she was involved in a dangerous situation that was far from over. But looking down at Danny's frightened face, she knew that she would do everything in her power to keep him safe, no matter what it cost her. The police station came into view ahead of them, and Sarah felt a small measure of relief. They had escaped immediate danger, but she had a feeling that their ordeal was just beginning. Webb was still out there somewhere, and until he was caught, none of them would be truly safe. At the police station, Sarah, Danny, Lisa, and Max were immediately escorted to a secure conference room. Detective Rodriguez arrived 20 minutes later, looking frustrated but unharmed. She reported that Webb had escaped before the backup units could surround the area, but they had found valuable evidence in Sarah's house that he had left behind in his hurry to get away. Danny was still clinging to Sarah's arm, refusing to let her out of his sight. The trauma of seeing Webb again, even from a distance, had clearly shaken him badly. A police psychologist, Dr. Chen, was brought in to help Danny feel more comfortable during the questioning process. She was a gentlewoman who specialized in working with traumatized children, and she brought coloring books and toys to help Danny relax. While Dr. Chen worked with Danny, Detective Rodriguez explained to Sarah what they had discovered during their initial investigation. They had gone to Danny's apartment building and found signs of a violent struggle. Neighbors reported hearing shouting and crashing sounds 3 nights ago. But no one had called the police because domestic disputes were, unfortunately, common in that building. The most disturbing discovery was that Jennifer Martinez had not shown up for her shifts at the diner where she worked, and her supervisor had been trying to reach her for 3 days. Her car was still parked outside the apartment building, and her purse and identification were found scattered in the stairwell. All evidence pointed to the fact that she had been taken against her will. Detective Rodriguez also revealed that Marcus Webb was wanted in connection with 3 other missing persons cases over the past 2 years. All of the victims had been single mothers working in service industry jobs, and they had all disappeared without a trace. The police suspected that Webb was involved in human trafficking, but they had never been able to prove it because there were no witnesses willing to come forward. Danny's testimony was crucial because he was the first person who could directly connect Webb to one of the disappearances. However, this also made him extremely dangerous to Webb, who would do anything to prevent the boy from testifying. Detective Rodriguez explained that they would need to put Danny in protective custody while they searched for his mother and built a case against Webb. Sarah asked if there was any way she could continue to care for Danny during this process. She had formed a strong bond with the frightened boy. She could see that he trusted her and Max. Being separated from them and placed with strangers would only add to his trauma. Lisa explained that it might be possible to arrange emergency foster care, but it would require extensive security measures to keep them both safe. While they were discussing options, Detective Martinez, the detective's partner, burst into the room with urgent news. They had received a tip from an anonymous caller who claimed to know where Webb was keeping several missing women, including possibly Jennifer Martinez. The location was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, and they were organizing a raid for that evening. The news gave everyone hope, but it also meant that the next few hours would be critical. If the raid was successful, and they rescued Jennifer and the other women, Webb's operation would be shut down. But if he escaped again, he would be even more desperate to silence Danny. The only witness who could testify against him, Detective Rodriguez made the difficult decision to move Danny to a safe house immediately. Sarah begged to go with him, and after a quick background check and consultation with Lisa's supervisor, agreed to let her serve as his emergency foster mother. Max would come with them, as the dog clearly provided emotional support for Danny. The safe house was a modest ranch home in a quiet suburb about 30 miles from Sarah's neighborhood. It was staffed by 2 U.S. Marshals who specialized in witness protection, and it had state-of-the-art security systems. Sarah felt a mix of relief and anxiety as they drove there in an unmarked police vehicle with tinted windows. Danny had been quiet during most of the discussions at the police station, but as they approached the safe house, he began typing on Sarah's phone again. His message read, "What if they don't find my mom? What if she's already dead?" The raw fear and grief in his words broke Sarah's heart. She typed back that the police were very good at their job, that they would do everything possible to bring his mother home safely. At the safe house, Danny seemed slightly more relaxed, especially when he saw that there was a fenced backyard where Max could play. The Marshals, Agent Thompson and Agent Williams, were professional but kind, and they explained the security procedures to Sarah and Danny. No one could enter or leave without proper authorization, and there were panic buttons in every room that would immediately summon help. Sarah helped Danny get settled in one of the bedrooms, which had been set up specifically for children with colorful decorations and age-appropriate books and games. Despite the cheerful surroundings, Danny remained anxious and kept asking Sarah if she was going to leave him there. She promised him repeatedly that she would stay with him for as long as he needed her to. That evening, as they sat in the living room watching a children's movie, Detective Rodriguez called with an update on the warehouse raid. Sarah answered the phone while Danny was distracted by the television, hoping for good news. The detective's voice was tense as she explained that the raid had been partially successful. They had rescued 4 women who had been held captive, but Jennifer Martinez was not among them. Even worse, Webb had apparently been tipped off about the raid and had evacuated the warehouse before the police arrived. They found evidence that Jennifer had been held there recently, including some of her personal belongings, but she was gone. Webb was still at large, and they had no idea where he had taken Jennifer or where he might be hiding. Sarah's heart sank as she realized. She would have to find a way to tell Danny that his mother still hadn't been found. She looked over at the boy who was laughing at something funny in the movie, and wondered how much more disappointment and fear he could endure. The search for Jennifer Martinez would continue, but with each passing hour, the chances of finding her alive grew smaller. Detective Rodriguez assured Sarah that they wouldn't give up the search, and that Danny's testimony would eventually help them catch Webb and shut down his operation permanently. But for now, they were all in a waiting game, hoping that Webb would make a mistake that would lead them to Jennifer before it was too late. 3 days had passed since they arrived at the safe house, and Sarah could see that the stress was taking a toll on Danny. He barely ate, had nightmares every night, and refused to let Sarah out of his sight for more than a few minutes. Max stayed by Danny's side constantly, seeming to understand that the boy needed his comfort and protection. On the 4th morning, Sarah was making breakfast when her phone rang. It was Detective Rodriguez with news that made her heart race. They had received another anonymous tip, this time from a woman who claimed to be Jennifer Martinez. The caller had whispered frantically that she was being held in a basement somewhere, and that she could hear train tracks nearby. The call had been cut short, but it was the first sign that Jennifer might still be alive. Sarah struggled with whether to tell Danny about the call. On one hand, it gave them hope that his mother was still alive. On the other hand, if it turned out to be false hope, it would devastate him even more. She decided to wait until they had more concrete information before sharing the news with Danny. The police immediately began searching areas near train tracks throughout the city, focusing on abandoned buildings and houses that might have basements suitable for holding prisoners. They also increased their efforts to track down Webb, following up on every lead and checking with all his known associates. Meanwhile, Sarah was dealing with her own challenges. Her house was still considered a crime scene, and she couldn't return home until the investigation was complete. Her work as a graphic designer had been put on hold, and she was living day by day, focused entirely on caring for Danny and helping him cope with his trauma. Lisa visited them regularly, bringing updates on the case and providing counseling support for both Sarah and Danny. She was impressed by how well Sarah was handling the emergency foster care situation, and she had begun the process of making the arrangement more permanent if needed. Sarah found herself hoping that they would find Jennifer soon, but also worried about what would happen to her relationship with Danny once he was reunited with his mother. On the 5th day, Detective Rodriguez called with the news they had all been praying for. Acting on information from the phone call, it discovered Webb's hideout in an old farmhouse about 40 miles outside the city. Jennifer Martinez was there, along with 2 other women who had been reported missing in recent months. All 3 women were alive, though they required immediate medical attention. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she listened to the detective's report. Jennifer was weak and traumatized, but she was conscious and asking desperately about her son. Webb had been arrested at the scene without incident, apparently caught off guard by the early morning raid. Several other members of his trafficking operation had also been taken into custody. The difficult part now was telling Danny that his mother had been found and preparing him for their reunion. Dr. Chen came to the safe house to help with this delicate process. She explained to Danny that his mother had been hurt by the bad man and that she was in the hospital getting better. Danny's reaction was a mixture of overwhelming relief and anxiety about his mother's condition. Sarah helped Danny get ready for the trip to the hospital, choosing his best clothes and making sure he had his favorite stuffed animal that one of the officers had brought from his apartment. Max would come with them, as Danny still couldn't bear to be separated from the dog who had helped save his life. The drive to the hospital seemed to take forever. Even though it was only 20 minutes, Danny sat quietly in the back seat, clutching Sarah's hand and staring out the window. Sarah could only imagine what was going through his mind as he prepared to see his mother again after everything they had both been through at the hospital. Jennifer Martinez was in a private room under police protection. She was physically weak from her ordeal, but her eyes lit up with pure joy and relief when she saw Danny walking through the door. Mother and son fell into each other's arms, both crying with happiness and relief. Sarah had to wipe tears from her own eyes as she watched their emotional reunion. Jennifer was grateful beyond words to Sarah for saving her son and keeping him safe during the most terrifying week of both their lives. Through tears, she thanked Sarah over and over again, saying that she would never be able to repay her for what she had done. Sarah assured her that seeing Danny reunited with his mother was all the thanks she needed. Dr. Martinez, the hospital physician, explained that Jennifer would need to stay in the hospital for several more days to recover from malnutrition and the psychological trauma she had endured. During this time, Danny would be able to stay with Sarah at a nearby hotel, visiting his mother daily until she was strong enough to go home. Danny was reluctant to leave his mother's side, even for a few hours. He had spent 5 days terrified that he might never see her again. And now he was afraid that if he left, something bad might happen to her. Jennifer gently reassured him that she would be safe in the hospital, surrounded by doctors and police officers who would protect her. Over the next 3 days, Sarah watched as both mother and son began the long process of healing from their trauma. Jennifer grew stronger each day, both physically and emotionally. Danny gradually became more like a normal 9-year-old boy, laughing and playing with Max in the hospital courtyard and showing his mother drawings he had made during their time at the safe house. Sarah found herself dreading the day when Jennifer would be discharged and she would have to say goodbye to Danny. Over the past week, she had come to love him like her own child, and the thought of returning to her quiet, solitary life felt empty and sad. But she knew that Danny belonged with his mother, and that their reunion was the happy ending this story needed. On Jennifer's last day in the hospital, she had a long conversation with Sarah about the future. She explained that she had been offered a job in a victim assistance program in another state, where she and Danny could start fresh with new identities to protect them from any remaining associates of Webb's operation. It would mean leaving everything familiar behind, but it would give them the safety and security they needed to rebuild their lives. Jennifer asked Sarah if she would consider moving with them, explaining that Danny had formed such a strong bond with her and Max that separating them might undo much of the healing progress he had made. She offered to help Sarah find work in their new city. She promised that they would be like family to each other. Sarah was stunned by the offer. She had been prepared to say goodbye forever. But the possibility of continuing to be part of Danny's life was more than she had dared to hope for. After thinking it over carefully, she realized that her old life in her hometown had been comfortable but somewhat lonely. The week she had spent caring for Danny had shown her how much joy and purpose came from having a family to love and protect. The three of them, along with Max, left the hospital together on a sunny morning exactly 1 week after Sarah had first encountered Danny hiding behind the tree in the park. As they drove toward their new life in a new state, Sarah reflected on how a simple dog walk had completely changed the course of her life. She had set out that morning looking for nothing more than fresh air and exercise. But she had found something far more valuable, a family that needed her as much as she needed them. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the kitchen of their new home in Colorado, watching through the window as Danny played fetch with Max in their fenced backyard. The mountain air was crisp and clean, and the small town of Pine Valley had welcomed them with open arms. It felt like a lifetime ago that she had been living alone in her old house. Taking the same solitary walk through the park every morning, Jennifer had recovered remarkably well from her ordeal, both physically and emotionally. She had started working as a counselor for other trafficking survivors, using her own experience to help women who had endured similar trauma. Her strength and resilience amazed Sarah every day, and watching her rebuild her life had been inspiring to witness. Danny was thriving in his new environment. He had started speaking again about a month after they moved to Colorado, beginning with whispered words to Max and gradually building up to full conversations. His first clear sentence had been, "Thank you for saving me, Sarah," which had brought tears to everyone's eyes. He was now attending a local elementary school, where he was making friends and excelling in his studies. The three of them had settled into a comfortable routine that felt natural and right. Sarah had started a small graphic design business from home, which allowed her to be available for Danny when he got home from school. Jennifer worked part-time at the Victim Assistance Center, and in the evenings, they would cook dinner together and help Danny with his homework. Weekends were for hiking in the mountains, visiting the local farmers market, and simply enjoying their quiet, peaceful life. Max had adapted to mountain living with enthusiasm, loving the wide-open spaces and the abundance of wildlife to watch and chase. He still slept in Danny's room every night, as if he knew that his job as the boy's protector was far from over. The bond between the boy and the dog remained as strong as ever, a daily reminder of how their lives had become intertwined on that misty morning in the park. The legal proceedings against Marcus Webb and his associates had concluded successfully. Webb was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for kidnapping, human trafficking, and a dozen other charges. His conviction had helped authorities shut down a trafficking network that had operated across multiple states, and several other victims had been rescued as a result of the investigation that Danny's testimony had triggered. Detective Rodriguez had stayed in touch with them throughout the months, providing updates on the case and checking on Danny's well-being. She had visited them once in Colorado, bringing gifts for Danny and expressing her admiration for how well he was recovering from his trauma. She told Sarah that Danny's courage in coming forward had not only saved his own life and his mother's, but it also led to the rescue of dozens of other victims. Sarah often thought about the chain of events that had brought them all together. If Max hadn't insisted on investigating that morning, if Danny hadn't trusted her enough to show her his note, if she hadn't had the courage to get involved in a dangerous situation, any one of these factors could have changed the outcome dramatically. She felt grateful every day for the instincts that had led her to help a frightened child, even when it meant putting her own safety at risk. One evening, as they sat on their front porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold, Jennifer brought up a subject they had all been thinking about but hadn't discussed. She asked Sarah if she would be interested in legally adopting Danny, making their family official in the eyes of the law. Jennifer explained that while she would always be Danny's mother, she wanted Sarah to have the same legal rights and responsibilities. Recognizing the crucial role she had played in saving and raising him, Danny's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. He threw his arms around Sarah and asked if this meant she would be his mom too, and that they would all stay together forever. Sarah was overwhelmed by the love and trust this little family was offering her. She had gone from being a single woman with no children to being part of a close-knit family that had been forged through crisis and sealed with unconditional love. The adoption process took several more months, but on a beautiful spring day, exactly 1 year after that first fateful morning walk, Sarah officially became Danny's adoptive mother. The small ceremony was held in the living room of their home. Detective Rodriguez, Lisa, and several of their new friends from Pine Valley in attendance. Danny wore his best clothes and carried a bouquet of wildflowers he had picked himself, and Max wore a bow tie for the occasion, as Sarah signed the final papers. She reflected on how much her life had changed since that morning when she had simply wanted to take her dog for a routine walk. She had gained a son and a best friend, found her life's purpose in protecting and nurturing a child who had needed her desperately, and discovered that the family she had always wanted had been waiting for her in the most unexpected place. That evening, as she tucked Danny into bed and Max settled onto his usual spot on the floor beside the bed, Danny asked her if she ever missed her old life. Sarah thought about the question carefully before answering. She told him that while her old life had been comfortable and peaceful, it had also been incomplete. She had been searching for something to give her life meaning and purpose, and she had found it in the most unexpected way. Danny smiled sleepily and told her that he was glad Max had found him behind the tree that day, because it meant they all got to be a family. Sarah kissed his forehead and turned off the light, leaving only the gentle glow of his nightlight to keep away any lingering fears from his past. As she walked downstairs to join Jennifer for their evening tea, she felt a deep sense of contentment and gratitude for the journey that had brought them all together. Outside, the Colorado mountains stood silent and majestic under a canopy of stars, watching over a family that had been born from tragedy but had emerged stronger and more loving than any of them could have imagined. Sarah's morning walks now included both Danny and Jennifer, and Max still led the way with his tail wagging, as if he was proud of the family he had helped create on that foggy morning when everything changed forever.